keep seeing all these people who are talented and completely dedicated to their craft, and I see their followers and think, they probably started, you know, just out of nowhere and just dedicated time to it and spread the word and made sure that people were acknowledging what and who they are, and in the sense that what they had to offer and their whole identity. And it's just the intimidation factor, is there when it comes to this kind of activity. You're recorded, it's out there for everyone to see, and it's not like you can just take it back. Uh, and it's not like you want to take it back. It's just as you develop and mature and keep working on your craft, what you presented may not be ever what you would want someone to see 5 years down the line. So it just makes it that much more complicated and cumbersome to address, to circumvent, to circumnavigate, to work around, to proceed through. It just makes everything that much more real. And you don't want to mess up and you don't want to do the wrong thing. But in that, you are doing the wrong thing and you are messing up because you aren't trying. But then if you try, you may fail, and your failure is on a scale. People don't talk about that. They talk about how you shouldn't be apprehensive to make mistakes. But they don't talk about the level of mistakes, and that even the people that do make mistakes, even though they prepared, they did everything they need to do on the one hand, still did not succeed. And by doing so, there's a whole nother playing field with the level of success versus failure. A failure can end you. A mistake can have a very detrimental impact and wreak havoc on your life. So trying to pretend that or present this idea and this notion that try and it doesn't matter how many mistakes you make is false. It's a falsehood. There's no real basis to that. Yes, mistakes are something that we shouldn't uh, avoid, right? We're going to do something wrong. It's human. But there are levels to a mistake. We are taught to do certain things that our mistakes should be minor, if any at all. And to be honest, there shouldn't be any mistakes because I'm telling you exactly what needs to be done. And when you're taking that level of instruction, you're really trying to invest in yourself and you have studied and applied yourself and you're an astute student. Those mistakes that you make are small. But for everybody else, it's not. And so this notion of the successful that they have where you just do the right things and things will happen to you is only one side of the story. It's one part. Um, you still need all these other facets of life to be successful. It's not just one trait that makes you successful. It's you, the individual, as you are, who has pushed themselves beyond any limit known to their immediate family, their immediate successes, to become successful. And that's for the first person. That's for the first person that starts out in that line. For everybody else, they either follow suit and push themselves to certain extents and try very hard to follow suit in that path of success, or they find their own way, or they're just dragged along. There's only so many options. What is really the underlying principle of all this is that there's a spectrum. It is black and white, but there's a spectrum between the black and white. It's like a shape. It's not just a point. And when we start to think about visually what these things that we're doing in society, how they stack up against the consequences that we're facing, then you start to see really the big picture and this pattern where it really is like one of these games, like life. There's a board, there are pieces, there's an objective, and there's rules that you need to abide by, and there's rules that you choose as you want to proceed. Like those books where you make a certain, there's a term for it, where every so often there's an action that needs to be done, and this, based on that action, you have to turn forward or turn back and the character's story. And it's an actual book that you flip, and those books, believe it or not, were literally the exact image or metaphor to what life is. But you don't necessarily get to go back. Or, in other words, your decision, if unfounded or irrational, doesn't necessarily, because of a whim you went for, take you forward in life. But if you do choose something, it can take you back. And when you go back, you're repeating your past. That's what history is. So when you actually start to put all the different pieces of education that people give you, you become this complete piece where you are able to navigate as would a piece on a board as the dice is rolled and the decisions are made, and so enacting the game, and participating in the game of life. And as you move forward, and life as in this life, not so much the board game life, I brought that up, don't want to confuse, but as you play your part, your role in this life that we have, that we wake up each day, if we're lucky to, and live, you start to really see this Rubik's Cube that is presented to you. And it's up to each one of us to approach this Rubik's Cube and play it or not. And by not playing it, we are still playing it. And that's what they tell you. You miss all the shots that you don't take. But you also miss the shots that you could make if you don't practice how to make the shots, And it's always a little bit more than what people want to give you. And when they give you a piece, you need to start thinking critically and think, well, what else is missing? And what else is attached to this? And how does this all line up in the bigger picture? Because as soon as you start to pretend that you yourself or you in life or this world that we're given in day by day does not impact somebody else because I am in it, we start to completely disassociate and move away from this notion of life and all the multiple facets of it, how intertwined everything is. And you really start to create havoc because you have now removed the ability to see how you as an individual affect the bigger picture. I always liken life to animals. And I say animals because as humans, we believe we are the apex predator. We are on the top of the food chain. But I would argue that if the food chain were actually made appropriately, we would be somewhere near the third level, middle area. We're one of the ones that if we don't live according to the ways that we as society have evolved in living, we will die because a rhino decided to run over us, a hippo charged us, or we drank some water that all these other animals were drinking and we didn't have the means to clean it and purify it. A mosquito bites us and we could die. We can get fever and tick and all these fever and there's another really bad one that comes when you get bit by ticks. Lyme disease, right? You can get all these diseases from these different insects and bugs, and then now we're talking about like nano-size, microscopic organisms like viruses and things. Well, then maybe we're not so apex as we think. But let's remove that conversation from the topic, right? The point is that when you compare our journey to animals, you can start to see how animals are really good at what they do. And their success is also on a spectrum. When you think about the cicadas that just happened, I keep bringing them up because, side note, I ate some cicadas. It was really delicious. At one point, I have it recorded. I will put it up at one point, But I saw in that one event some very gorgeous, if you would liken the term to be gorgeous, or the A looking, A plus superstar looking cicadas, and then the not so A plus looking, more like an F. It's something that you're just like, wow, why would you be around? It'd probably do better for me to, you're gonna die. Like, you're just gonna die immediately. And it's sad, but you laugh because it's just like, what chance do you have? If those are the ones that really were out here doing all this stuff and really making all the noise, then you're late. You're not gonna make it. But there still is a place for everything. And they each have their role. And like ants, there is a hierarchy, and there are the ones at the very bottom that still go out every day and do their thing, or every second of the day, with no fear or concern over what their place is or what their position is in life. And once you start to acknowledge what your place is, what your piece is, and how your piece actually is part of the bigger pieces around you that allow everything to move, you start to really take pride and value your piece. And that piece that you take pride in is your purpose. And how well you live your purpose dictates your success. There are some people, you hear stories that all they ever did was just be a parent. And they had the most amazing time doing so. And there were tons of evidence and witnesses to testify on that. And then you have other people who literally had everything in the world you could ever ask for on any sort spectrum, on any chart, and there's nobody to say anything to them. There's nobody to testify. There's maybe the one odd person that says, they were a good person, yada yada yada. Or they die so young, you don't know what more they could have contributed, or vice versa. The point is, once we start as a society to pretend that we are not the most superior thing on this planet, that we all have something more to offer, that we are not the smartest thing in the room, that there is something that could be, that we could be doing more of, right? That we could feel purpose about, that we could actually strive to be better at. We're always going to feel like we're in a rat race, and that there is nothing better than what we have now. And with anything, even our health, at some point it peters out. And as it does so, we must start, or before it does, right? Rather, we must acknowledge that and put things in place to remedy the situation before it's too late. And it's just, again, even with success, and going back to the beginning, where seeing everybody else doing what they're doing makes me that much more content with just keeping me to me. I'm a diamond in the rough, is how it feels. And I mean rough. And I'm just not someone that talks about themselves that much, in the sense that I'd rather not say anything because I realize everyone else's problems are so easy. There are answers to everyone's problems, but the ones that there are no answers to really are the ones that are what drives people to do what they do. You may feel like you have purpose, but you don't have a sense of direction. And purpose and direction are intertwined. So what you deem to be a purpose now may not actually be your purpose. Therefore, you feel like you're lost, even though you're really good at what you're doing. Or everyone's telling you, like, what are you talking about? You should be happy. Or you keep worrying about what's going to happen when nothing as bad has happened, because you've been doing everything you need to do to ensure that nothing bad has happened. And yet, you still have this notion or sense of loss and loneliness. And it's just confusing and conflicting because, again, why do you feel that way? There's no reason for it. But there is. There is a reason for it. And once you acknowledge that, the problem then is, what the hell do you do? Because truly, there's not much you can do. But you can spend a lot of money trying to figure something else. Figure something else in the sense, Why do you feel the way you do? What ways can you cope with it? What does it mean? Why do you do what you do? And in reality, I think of humans just like I think of the cicadas or the ants, where we're all connected together regardless of how we want to view things or feel, or how we believe that there are me versus you and them versus us, and however we were taught to acknowledge the differences that exist among us. But we are still the human race, no matter how you view anything. And as special and unique as we are, we also have to realize that as a civilization, we are young. Mother Earth, nature, has been around much longer and has succeeded well beyond our wildest imaginations, and yet we still find ourselves impacted by Mother Nature at all costs, including the Mother Nature of ourselves, our own minds, our own nature versus nurture, our environment, the beliefs of the people around us, you know, the earth in of itself, whatever weather Mother Nature wants to throw at us, we're all impacted by it. And it's one of those situations where there's nothing you can do. There really isn't. And I think once you start to accept that, then you can find something to do. You can realize and realign yourself to the thing that really brings you the sense of purpose and direction, and which is really more like a sense of self, is how I could think of it. Once you start to navigate that space, you really start to identify the problems that plague you. And those problems, to be honest, probably are a part of you. They're your archetype. They're the thing that makes you tick. Um, we would just be numb, lifeless creatures, like we view the animals, had we not the issues of sense of self, where we are pondering and plaguing and basically killing one's ourself by thinking of the identity or lack of identity that we have amongst our peers and within ourselves, right? Our perception to our peers. And then when you remove peers and you become more ostracized and you really start to seclude yourself, then you start to realize how much is going on with your peers that you are unaware of, that you can't really attest to or tune into or pretend to understand, because you are ostracized. You don't have those connections. You choose to not be connected to people and not deal with the problems that people bring, because you're under the impression that since you have problems, your problems must be open and obvious to everyone else. And in reality, everyone's just worried about their own problems, which is striking, knowing that their problems are not that dire, but it is to them. So then how can you even begin to socialize when you're starting to have those notions? How can I be around somebody who has children when I think children are unnecessary, but life would tell you otherwise. Without reproduction, there is no sustenance or continuation of life. But then also with children comes a lot of problems, because children have to be raised by A, other children, and B, the environments and the nurture nature of each child that they come in contact. Not to mention the universe as a whole, adults. That's tough. When I think of animals and how they in our minds are so uncultured and uncivilized, I'm just surprised that we think that, knowing that their success rate with living is higher than ours. They've been drawn to near extinction time and time again, yet they still survive somehow. But we can't even figure out as a society how to handle a virus, how to handle money, how to handle our systems that we thrive off of. I'm confused. I don't believe that their founding fathers or anybody before us that created this system, or even now, would like to admit that. But it's getting out of hand. How do you fix that? Well, you start with addressing the issues by really starting to break down the picture, by really figuring out the mapping, the systems at B, and present that imagery in a way where there is information for anybody to fully understand, where they so willing to engage with it. And by engaging with the information, you are then able to synthesize the the present scenarios, the present circumstances, the outcomes, and align those to one that suits your purpose, the one that's a best fit. Removing yourself from the ability to see that everything is connected impedes that outcome. Thinking that my car needs oil, but it's okay, I'm running low on oil, but I keep putting gas, 3 months from now, that's not going to be okay. These sayings that we have in our society, like kicking the can, or where it went sideways, are just one moniker that we as humans have for an excuse, a common theme or a common motif, which is, I'm human, I couldn't do it. But humans have done so much. And humans have survived a lot, including animals who have been here for centuries. So how come we can't figure this out? Well, I think it starts, one, with understanding that we all come from different places, but we all have the same goal. And what is that goal? And how do we address that there are maybe some differences? And how do we make sure that everyone is satisfied in their goal and how that aligns to the bigger goal? Once we have that clear, now everyone has the same amount of pride and identity at stake. And once you have that sense of identity and pride at stake, everyone feels like there's skin in the game. Even the person who's not the owner will want to act and carry on like they are the owner, to the point where the owner will need to reinforce at times the actual order of things. Everyone has to be in charge of each role, but everyone also has to understand their role amongst each role. If I am at the top of the chart, of the organizational chart, I cannot allow someone at the very bottom to ever communicate in a way that would denote that that was not the status quo. We all should feel that we have the ability to speak, but the manner in which we speak really is what dictates the outcomes or the interpretation, potentially, of said message. So to present oneself in a manner that would be untowards that structure, again, makes the whole process that much more difficult. When everyone understands their chain or their piece in the link and there's organization, we can then take pride as well in what we do. Because if anyone is motivated by A, their position, or by B, their lack of position, they will make it be known so that they can strive to meet expectations to hold said position. The system, the way it is now, with everybody believing that they can be their own boss, and people not even liking the term boss, is untowards that end goal. The system must continue for us to continue. Otherwise, we will not have system nor society. More control is not always the worst thing. Lack of control tends to be something of a double-edged sword. There needs to be boundaries. There needs to be a sense of orderliness, but with freedom of voice. Everyone should have a say. Whether that say is understood or well received is a whole other aspect that, again, reverts to the whole notion earlier on discussed, where each person has certain pieces that could, with certain criteria and environment, create success. But not everyone is meant to succeed, because the ones that are successful are the ones that do everything they need to do. They are astute students, astute learners, right? Avid learners, and their mistakes are limited and relegated to the spectrum that is closer to their success, right? So somebody who is successful at making money, but they make money illegally, their mistake would be relative to that, aka death or jail, right? But now if we're talking about somebody who studies very hard, has found a good job or a good whatever, a good next step for that studying that they do, or they have taken their study and become very successful at an entrepreneurial venture or skill, their mistake will be limited or relegated or convert or tied, right, correlated to said success. So let's say in that situation, if they decided to take a gamble of $5 million and they've never done that before, or they've had certain circumstances where they have made maybe $1 million investment and it worked out. Now their success is relegated to that. Therefore, they could go bust. They could lose the 5 million. It could be the worst decision ever. Or it's closer to their $1 million success, where it's only $4 million more dollars. If they made 1 million successful easily, they could just replicate that 4 more times, right? It's one of those kinds of principles. It's a ratio. That's why if you go back basic to math, it's black and white. The answer is correct or it's wrong, or there's like a range. And that range is the spectrum. So all this is to say is that no matter how you approach anything, you need to think of the spectrum. You need to think of the positive and the negatives, the outcomes and the consequences. Because for every decision, good or bad, there is a risk and reward. But the risk could truly outweigh any one decision if it were acknowledged that there were risks and rewards for every decision. And the ones that are able to take a decision that is so risky that there was no reward, or the reward was so great that it was truly risky, is because they had all this Rubik's Cube of time spent trying to decode and inform their brain of the best decision to make, knowing all circumstances. And that in turn allowed them to take that gamble and win.